Humanity has its share of alpha males who want to dominate their environment. This might be in the narrow context of a local football club, or it might be the lust for money or national political power. In prehistorical times, when humanity was emerging from the great apes, we were probably hunter-gatherers. Assuming our numbers hadn't hit the carrying capacity of the land, there was little reason to compete over resources other than maybe fighting over women. That is as old as dirt. At some point, our brains grew more complex and our cognitive ability developed. We became self-aware and could conceptualize abstract concepts. This makes us alone among animals. It's a great strength which has enabled some truly stellar technological and philosophical developments. But there is a downside. We became aware of the inevitability of death, and now we generally seek to avoid it. This meant that for much of history, the strongest and most psychotic rose to dominate other humans in tribes with the threat of violence. Even today, this is the reality of much of the law. It might be codified and some of the more skillful can create a workaround, but fundamentally, the law is an opinion with a gun and nothing more. Do as I say or face fine, censure, jail, violence or death, and we alone as a species are susceptible to this. You can't threaten the ground to produce wheat, you can't intimidate a cow to produce milk, but because we alone have a concept of the future, you can threaten and control other humans. In its most primitive form, this was bonded, chained slavery. This existed virtually everywhere, in all cultures, throughout human history, and not just in the US in the 1850s, as they'd have you believe. And this implicit threat is the basis of society and government. In the West today, this is less obvious because we get to vote, so people imagine we have a choice. We don't. If international capital supports both sides in any election, their will shall be done regardless of who you vote for. Non-mainstream candidates, candidates who might actually change something, are ignored or misrepresented, vilified, banned from social media, or even jailed. People say, we get free education and healthcare. Give me 40% of your money and I'll give you some free stuff as well, and I'll become very wealthy in the process. Farmers give their cattle visits from the vet, but they are still milked and then slaughtered. Western government grant people more freedoms than authoritarian ones, but that is simply so they will be more productive and thus pay more taxes. Slaves are underproductive and require supervision and control. Now, prior to World War I, there wasn't much in the way of universal suffrage, but after that disaster, people demanded freedom, but they accepted the right to vote every 5 years instead. It's no coincidence that governments take it upon themselves to educate children. Now, anyone paying attention will know that the government universally suck when it comes to providing much of anything. If you could have a government house or a private house, which would you pick? State healthcare or private? State education or private? So, why do they want to educate your kids? To condition them, of course. They can't have independent thinkers, so they're conditioned to obey and regurgitate rather than think. It's based on a classic Prussian model which was designed to create factory workers and soldiers. Also, they get certain people dependent on a state salary. What teacher will say, I get 13 weeks off for every year and I only work about 60% of the time anyway when I am here compared to your dad? Will they rock the boat? A lot of people depend on this system and in doing so become commercially useless. They become part of the problem, and if you demand your freedom, they will attack you as selfish and uncaring. In that way, the state can save money on security if other plebs simply demand you comply. We've seen that with the COVID mask Karens. Then we get Orwell's idea of continuous war. These days, it's not really about war with Eurasia or East Asia anymore. Since the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the Russian threat dissipating, the West isn't really militarily threatened at home and China's a long way away. So new enemies were needed. Well, we had Islamic terrorism by pursuing the rather odd policy of bombing the hell out of half a dozen countries in the Middle East and then inviting aggrieved or bereaved people to come and live with us. What could possibly go wrong? The government then pretend to be shocked and stunned when people with Wholly different cultures behave in wholly different ways. Then we had global warming, the impending apocalypse that never quite hoves into view, no matter how many times we're told it's a tipping point. That and the fact that celeb global warming baiters can't quite seem to give up their private jets and 5 homes. They are the definition of hypocrisy, and saying, "I offset," doesn't cut the mustard. We've had a race war despite the fact that actual racism is all but gone from society in the West. Consider this: all the immigrant footsteps are headed north, from Africa to Europe or from Mexico to the US. The very actions of people who claim to be oppressed belies the narrative. How many people headed south of the Mason-Dixon line to escape free states in the 1850s? H.L. Mencken famously said, "The whole aim of practical politics is to keep the population alarmed and hence clamorous to be led to safety by an endless series of hobgoblins, most of them imaginary." So what's to be done? We are in dangerous times, and scapegoats will be sought. That might easily include us. But tell the truth, my friends. Explain it calmly and peacefully. I've linked to a video in the description which explains how to change minds, but for now, simply get people to see this one fact. Laws are force. No more, no less. To understand this is to take the first step towards your freedom. If you like this, please like, recommend, and subscribe.